Thank you, Sally. Thank you for the invitation to be in such a prestigious university and a community that joined us today. Just a little note about ITDPs, a non-profit organization that, as Sally mentioned, was founded in 1985, and we get some and most of our funding, not all of it, but most of our funding from the Hewlett Foundation. So we're very grateful to be in this area too. Today I'm going to talk to you about some of the projects we have worked in Latin America. We're a sort of a technical think tank that tries to influence public policy on transportation in cities. And as Sally mentioned, we don't want to, the idea is not to replicate so much the American model, but try to have more balanced mobility options in our cities. So some of the things I'm going to some of the things we work on, it's basically has to do with all these challenges or externalities in urban transport. Now, of course, we know about the environment impacts, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The rapid motorization rates, so especially in developing countries. The accidents, which is a public health issue that needs to be dealt much better than it has been. The decay of public transport in general as motorization increases, the congestion, which doesn't affects everyone, but especially the ones that live in the outskirts of the cities in Latin America, who are usually the poorest. The sprawl, which is a very bad phenomenon from cities as they grow and they're very car dependent. And the difficult access for the most vulnerable, thinking about the pedestrians, the elder, the children, the people with disabilities. So what we want to try is to change that, and usually all these have to do a lot with the policies that favor only the car use. So, for example, in Mexico, about 20% of the greenhouse gases come from the transport sector. And also that's it's the highest industry that contributes in the global warming. So that's something very important if we want to address that. Of course, the transport is, and the tendency is to even increase a little bit, according to the World Bank. So that's a very important issue. And sometimes people say, okay, how about the electric cars? They'll save us. I mean, we can get that. Well, first of all, also the electricity that is produced in Mexico a lot and in a lot of Latin American countries is through thermoelectrics. But even if we reduce the emissions somehow, I mean, I don't think this is the type of future or the type of cities we want to live in the future. So we also work a lot on how the cities have grown and the evolution, because we cannot only think about the transport systems, we also how the city grows is very important in order to integrate better the projects we do. So I think we grew from the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, this paradigm that we needed to build more roads in order to satisfy people's needs of mobility, because of course the car was the darling of everyone. It still has a lot of advantages, the car. I'm not completely against cars. I mean, I think they have a certain place in our mobility systems, just I think we have put too much emphasis on them. So that was the paradigm of the highways, but usually as people got more cars and everyone began to use more the car, it has all the externalities we have talked about. Then there is this paradigm of mobility, which is also growing a lot, and I think it's very useful to trying to balance more, having more mass transit, having a lot of more options, which is, I think, all about what we want to work. However, if you only have this mobility paradigm of providing more options, usually people, I mean, that doesn't necessarily reduce car use. And as you know, the space we have in the cities is limited. So I think we have to go more into access paradigm of when you mix the development of the city and the development of the mobility plans, which is called transit-oriented development. And that includes also finding ways of restraining car use or getting some of the internalizing the externalities that the car use makes and putting them into the other systems. As ITDP, we have 8 principles that try to link all these areas, this transit-oriented development, about how communities we think should being developed or at least or redeveloped in some cases. So we look and we have some points, some metrics like sort of like the leads metrics for buildings, but for whole communities. And we give points to things about how walkable development or an area is, depending on the sidewalks, the distances, how accessible it is. We also put a lot of emphasis if this community is cycle friendly, depending on also the infrastructure, the parking for bicycles, the safety, things like that. How connected it is, depending on also, we don't like big blocks. We prefer smaller blocks where people can walk through. If there is transit, of course, that's a very important thing because sometimes we have these great green developments that are really not nearby mass transit. So we think that's a mistake. We have to do them together. Also, if there is mix of use, I don't think people want to live just in communities where there is nothing to do, but also there needs to mix a little bit offices, commerce, housing, and all that. No, in a good, orderly way. Of course, it has to be more densified, as I said, sprawl kills densification, and it's very hard to bring mass transit to areas that are not dense. Also, what I mentioned about the size of the blocks and how compact the human scale of the design is very important. It's not the same if you have a place where you need to walk over a mile to get to a grocery than if it's more coherent and more how easy it is to get. And of course, we want also these communities that have less car use, that people use less the car and use more mass transit, they walk, they use other modes. Latin America is a very important phenomenon in urban development because it's an area that it's the largest urbanized region according to a UN report, with 80% of the population living in cities. So it came very fast from being semi-rural with some cities to being mostly urban, like it is happening in Asia as well. But I think Latin America did it in a slower way, but also more steady since the last few decades. So it's also an area where, a place where a lot of the needs have to be addressed in cities. The cities usually haven't grown with a lot of plan, but also, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So a little bit my point of this talk is that a lot of innovative projects have happened in Latin America without them being perfect, but a part of it has to do with the fact that we, of course, it's a continent that is not as poor as Africa, but it has a lot of needs. So as the urban population has grown, also a lot of the projects to address those needs have grown. For example, the bus rapid transit was invented in Curitiba almost, 40 years ago. So basically, the mayor, Jaime Lerner, said that he didn't have enough money to build a metro, so he decided, why don't we give a dedicated lane to a bus and make it functional like a metro, where people pay before with a card and the doors open and the boarding and the boarding and alignment is very fast. And it was a very innovative idea. And of course, he did that along with other things like densifying along those corridors, which is also now what we consider a best practice. Then he went to Bogota, where he even took it to a next level because of the capacity. They were able to put more passing lanes. So Bogota did it like around mid-90s, end of 90s, began building the BRT called Transmilenio. And it's right now is the highest capacity BRT in the world. And from then it really grew to a lot of places. No? This is a graph that shows the amount of kilometers of BRT systems and through the years, and you can see after Bogota a lot of systems, and not only in Latin America, in other places of the world. One of the reasons why the BRT is so popular is for like how much it costs compared to other systems. No, for example, if you have 1,000 million US, you could do basically this will cover a big city completely with bus rapid transit systems, whereas if you had with that same amount, you can only do 50 kilometers of light train or elevated rail, or even less metro. No? So that was the reason why really the BRT took off a lot. And it also takes a long, much shorter time to be built. In Quito, it was very interesting. It was one of the first, in Ecuador, it was one of the first cities where it got into the city center. So it wasn't only like in these big roads, but in narrower roads, as you can see in the picture. In Mexico City, we were involved in this, the planning of this system that goes also to the city center, and I was very pleased to see that they also, the government, we convinced to also invest on the, not only in the system, but on the whole street. No? So once you do this type of systems, it's not only about the buses and the lanes and moving people, but also about how to improve the whole area. And that has to do with also the fact that you can put good sidewalks at level access, and that also brings businesses back to these areas that have gone to other places. In Buenos Aires, it's on the widest avenue, one of the, perhaps the widest avenue in the world, 9 de Julio, which has a lot of lanes, and it was sort of unbalanced that they didn't have a high quality mass transit system and such a big road, an important road. No, even now Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, is investing a lot of money because has, of course, the 2 major sporting events coming up. So there is a lot of investment in infrastructure, but we want that investment, we're trying to influence that investment goes into the right things, such as this type of systems. In Lima, they did a great project called Transmetropolitano, and as you can see, very robust. Sometimes there is some issues about these systems, how you access to it. When it's very high capacity, you have to put it in the middle sometimes to avoid left turns of cars and things like that. But of course, you have to make it as friendly as possible to everyone, even people with disabilities. No. Cali in Colombia did a very interesting system because it has 3 types of buses. So it has the ones for the big roads, has a medium one, this one that has doors on both sides. So sometimes it can go into the dedicated lane, and sometimes it goes off the dedicated lane, and has so it's very flexible, and yeah, it's very interesting. And you have these smaller buses that are the feeders to these ones. So it's a very interesting integrated system. That's also what we want in cities, not just to have a few systems, but really an integration of the systems. This is the bus I was mentioning. As you can see, it can go on the BRT lane, but so people board on the station on the left side of the bus, but also goes off the lane, and it's a very interesting system. I think that's the future the public transports in a lot of cities, at least in Latin America. Also in China, we have an office in Guangzhou, and it was help the government do this system that, as you can tell, is very in a very high dense area. Of course, it has passing lanes, and it's very interesting because the whole area is also very dense, and they did all together both things. So it also has, you cannot see here, but it has a public bike system on the corridor. So you know, in China, when they decide to do something, they do it very, very strongly, and this is a very interesting system too. In Jakarta, in Indonesia, we also have an office, and it's also how the system works. It has some operation problems because the regulation on not allowing cars go into the system sometimes is not as strong as we want, but still it's a major improvement from what it was before on travel times, capacity, emissions, and all these things we want to improve. Now in India too, there is some of one of these systems in Ahmedabad, and it's also a very good system. By the way, we have a standard that we call it the BRT standard, where we grade the different systems according to their performance, and it helps us say if it's a gold standard BRT, silver, bronze, or not even a BRT, no? Because we also want to have a standard of quality of this type of systems. In Johannesburg, in South Africa, as a result of the World Cup in 2010, they constructed this system called Rea Vaya, which is very good. It was the first mass transit system in that city, and it's also an innovation, no? Okay, so some principles about what I was saying. Transit-oriented development is about matching transit capacity with densification along the corridor. So you don't want to have a spread out system, but really to build around these corridors where people already have the need to be moved. So next to it have or actually the other way around, where you have a system, try to densify along. Those are the areas you want to really densify. As I mentioned before, in Curitiba was a very good example. The corridor goes along this area, and they build a lot, and they also put some caps on where you cannot build. So they give fiscal, and they encourage through a lot of mechanism to construct along the BRT line, and not to construct in other areas farther from the central areas. Guangzhou, as I showed, did a lot of densifying, and a good example in the US is Cleveland. Cleveland has a wonderful BRT. I think it's silver, according to our standard, silver or almost gold, and they've done a lot of good investment in some of the central area that had before some problems. It still does, but this helps. As I mentioned, the mixing about activities is very important too. If you can have retail, office, housing, for example, it makes it a more attractive environment, whereas you only have office buildings. So even the real estate developers realize that this is better business for them. No, people want to live or rent in places that are more like this. In Mexico City, I mean, it's not only about BRT, of course, or mass transit. We want to have other systems that complement, and of course everyone has to arrive either on foot, or walking, or on bicycle, or even in car if you can do some park and ride. But in Mexico City we have now a good public bike system that's the same, more or less like a copy of the Barcelona one, and it's there were a lot of doubts about it when it started about 4 years ago, about if people were gonna vandalize the bicycles, of that there wasn't a lot of bicycle culture yet in such a big city. And it has been a surprisingly really good system, although it's only in an area of the city, but it has very good safety and theft records. And according to a guide we have, by the way, all our guides and documents are available on our website. You can download them for free. So we have a bike sharing guide, and it turned out that the Mexico City was the third best, I think, behind Paris and London's one. So it's a good way also to capture the people's imagination, or bringing a bicycle that is not necessary you have to own, with all this economy moving to sharing a lot, not so much like even car sharing. It's going to continue to grow. You already have it here. And so it's a very interesting area to move around. In Buenos Aires, for example, there is these pedestrian streets that have started in the last few years. It has always, usually in Latin America, the centers, the city centers, as some of you know, are the oldest areas of the city. So it's usually where there is the church, the powers, the civil, the government. So there's a plaza. So it's a very simple but functional way of designing the centers of cities, and usually are places that are very walkable, where there's a lot of historical buildings, where there's a lot of things that can be a lot of value on those areas that sometimes need a little push from the government or from businesses, or even better if it's all together, no? So now in Buenos Aires, they're beginning to expand some pedestrian streets as a tendency, and as in many other cities, is to make these pedestrian streets, no? Where it also helps commerce. The businesses at first, usually they are doubtful about it, but usually they end up loving these type of streets because they sell more. Or the protected bike lanes in Rio de Janeiro, they are also very successful, and they are like even, well, here it's the beach, and it's a public space, and it's on Sundays this is close to the car, so it's a very good public space. And I think that's what we want, more of these types of space in our cities. Or in Medellin has done some wonderful stuff on these areas that are not very accessible, or were not very accessible, these poor areas and the slums. And they put some electric stairs that they don't cost so much, and they really bring a lot of accessibility to these areas. Of course, that together with a program of dignifying the public space and where these people live, it reduces violence, it helps gives opportunities to people, and even I went there last month, and they are imperfect. There is no graffiti, there is anything. People take care of it because they see it as part of their environment. So this is very good practice. They have this metro cable, this elevated thing that it helps. It certainly gives accessibility to areas that normally were hard. No, of course you have to do it together. It is not a very high capacity system, but if you do it together with some, they put some public libraries below and some football, soccer courts and things like that. It's really amazing the change you can make in a community. Okay, despite all these successes, we still have the tendency about having, as people have more money, we'll have more cars, no? And this is the tendency on non-rich countries, and it's towards 2050, it's still very high. So part of the challenge, I guess, is not to just people will still want to own cars, but maybe they don't have to use it so much, or what other options you give that they don't have to use it to go everywhere. For example, Mexico City, despite all these successes, is according to an IBM commuter pain index, was very bad. And believe me, I've been to some of it, and it is painful. And of course, not everything is BRT. I mean, you have all these semi-informal or paratransit systems that compete with each other, no? And so that's also a big challenge. It's more about the institutional arrangements or how you distribute the space on the street, no? And the rates of motorization for Brazil and Mexico are very high, as you can see in this graph, no? As economies grow, they also people usually tend to buy more car. So one of my messages is that we can't just wait for the next innovative mayor to arrive. These were really innovative mayors: Jaime Lerner, Curitiba, Marcelo Ebrard of Mexico City, Enrique Peñalosa, along with Mocus in Bogota, Sergio Fajardo of Medellin. I mean, there were people that really invested in this, and in some cases they took the example of using themselves, the mass transit or the bikes. But I mean, we cannot just wait for the next one to arrive. We hope they arrive, but we need to also do other things. So one of my things I wanted to end up my presentation is that we also have to restrain car use, even if it's not very popular politically. But part of it is that you stop, you push and pull to the mass transit or to the bike, no? And part of it is parking limits, congestion charges, and take subsidy of fuels gradually, as we were talking before with Sally. I think parking is one of the areas that is less understood in our field, in transport, in the transport field at least, because a lot of people think that you need more parking, and that way you will see less cars in the street or less congestion, which is not really what happens. So some of the best practices, as stated by Professor Donald Shoup, is that the parking, you should set up a price for the use of, especially of areas where a lot of car trips happen, and there is a lot of battle for the parking spaces, no? So one of the things is that the charges of parking should be in a price that 80% of occupancy, and then you have 15% always available. Also, I mean, some of the things we have found out is that a lot of time is lost with people looking for parking spaces, so that creates also emissions, congestions. And if you can do it like they do in San Francisco, to vary by time and location, it's even better. It gives you flexibility. You can play around where to put certain rates and things like that. And of course, the amount of off-street parking should be linked with how much traffic the street can handle, no, in peak hours. That's the main thing, really. In Mexico City, we help with the government start a parking meter program that started like 2 years ago, and it was interesting. It was in Polanco, which is a upper middle class or upper class neighborhood with a lot of car use. And at first the neighbors were against it, but eventually they began to realize it was good. And of course there were some residential permits allowed to some of the people that live in the area. And some of the pictures about the before and after, it's in the same day. It's not, this looks like a Sunday, but it's really a day. So I mean, people really like that all of a sudden traffic disappear, no? And I think also helps get a policy right on where cars can park or not. of course, part of the success of a program like that is that there should be some enforcement, no? Because if you get after a while, if you don't pay, you get this, and there is some fines, of course, and there's people that enforce it. And very important, well, here we set up a 30% revenue. It can be vary according to the system, the fare, everything, but part of the money that gets into from the system has to stay in the area. That's how people, I mean, it's fair, no? If you are charging for an area, at least the area should be improved, and 30% will go to doing things like widening of sidewalks, improving lighting, green areas, making more accessible, no? So that's also key of these programs. In one way, it's about reducing car use, but also it's about how you get better results in the infrastructure and the whole landscape. This is a picture from this is on-street parking, but off-street parking is as important. As you might know, a lot of the codes, construction codes, give certain amount of space that has to be dedicated to parking. So this is a picture from Detroit that hasn't fared so well lately, and economically, not only because of this, but certainly I think the urban design has to do with this. So how much parking should developers? The traditional approach is require land developers to build as much off-street parking as possible. But really what European cities have been doing for years is allow as much parking as what I was saying, the trips generated do not congest the streets. No? So for example, this is the London Gherkin building and has 0 spaces for parking, and is the highest value building in the world. Whereas Chicago, for example, still has these codes like in many Latin American cities where at least 30% of building space is dedicated to parking. So you have these not so pretty buildings, and also the impact of having a view like this at the street level is not very pleasant or economically successful, I would say. So anyway, and you can also play about regulations like a floor area ratio, that if you build less parking, you can grow higher, no? And that developers really like. So if you build a lot of off-street parking in the building, they're expensive to build. Mexico City, so most of them are underground, so it's also more expensive for the real estate developers. So what they've done, for example, in Switzerland, is to fix parking supply to regulate traffic and air pollution objectives. So you have just certain number of spaces and you're set with that. And then if you, for example, Amsterdam, for every spot created off-street, you should remove a spot from on-street. So you basically have a limit of how many parking spaces you want to build in these cities. Because as you know, all trips start and end, car trips start and end in a parking spot. So some of the results that Zurich in Switzerland has done is that it has reduced car use, it has increased bicycle use, mass transit use. So those are the things we want to do. And it's also very important to measure these things, so you have arguments when you discuss with the decision makers and community. For example, Paris doesn't allow parking within 500 meters from a metro stop, no off-street parking. So new developments don't have space for cars, like New York, for example. This is some of the things that New York has done in the recent years. This space dedicated for car parking now are these micro plazas, which are interesting. Other travel demand management tool is that has been used in a lot in Latin America is to have this odd even license plate. So certain days of the weeks it cannot drive the car. They have it in Mexico City, Bogota, Sao Paulo, and Manila in the Philippines. It's useful to a certain degree, but we prefer other. I mean, it's a first measure, but you have to do it with other things. For example, it has some advantages. It's easy to implement. It's generally accepted by the public, and it has in the short term you definitely have less cars, but over the time usually you have. People tend to buy another car, or a person would make a trip to take a friend to their job, and the length of the trips can also increase. No, taxi trips also tend to increase. Of course, there is an issue about how it has to be very transparent and well enforced and managed in order not to have fraudulent practices, and it's not a long-term solution, but it works in some cities. Some final ideas before I present you a video and we go to the Q&A part is that, well, as I say, Latin America has some innovative projects like I show, but still a challenge to maintain high level of public transport. As we have, most cities have around 60–70% of the trips are made on public transport, so how to maintain that and make it a better experience of the user, better quality, more integration, while we also have high motorization levels, which is hard to change. Another big challenge is the feeder system. Not everything are going to be just BRT, but also how you deal with informal systems. Also, I didn't talk a lot about, but this is a huge issue that we'll continue to see, as we have seen in many Asian cities, motorcycle use. As the mass transit doesn't provide the solution for many, people tend to use a motorcycle, which is cheap and easy to get around. So that's a big challenge, how you deal with this while also restraining car use. As I put a picture about the electric cars, technologies are certainly part of the solution, but we cannot just think that that's going to get us out of this. We need to really, what we work on is to change people's lifestyles, and to, especially younger people, maybe they don't aspire so much to have a car, but they prefer to live in a well-located area and have a lot of options. I think we need to provide more options in order to change these lifestyles. And technologies are important, of course, all these applications. Eventually, it's more about, I want to go from A to B, what are the different options I have, and how much it's going to cost me, but that's not the only thing, or the clean technologies. Innovative leaders are key, but it's also need more actors. We need more people, more NGOs, more academics doing studies. We need people that inspire, that even famous people that get on the bicycle and inspire other people. And the media also needs to get in Latin America, we still have this idea that have a subsidy on the fuels is good, for example. So how we change that? No, we have to inform better. We have to get better data and people that are willing to try innovative projects. And as I mentioned, this is our website. You can get all our information there. And now I'm going to put you a video we did a couple of years ago on to talk about how much the car really cost us as a society. There you go. I'm sorry.
What did you do?
Sorry.
It's okay. How do you get it?
It's only a 4-minute video.
Compre un coche, el transporte del futuro. Es cómodo y fácil de usar. Muy fácil de usar. La ciudad es tuya. Sube, arranca y disfruta el paseo. Ya no es tan fácil. Cada año el uso del automóvil aumenta en un 6.4% en las ciudades y para 2030 habrá 70 millones de vehículos privados en el país, lo que representa un crecimiento de 350% en relación al 2009. Y todos estamos pagando lo que los economistas llaman externalidades o costos reales a la sociedad. El tráfico, la contaminación, la pérdida de tiempo, el estrés, los daños a la salud, la falta de espacio público, los accidentes y el cambio climático son el precio que estamos pagando por el uso excesivo del automóvil. Pero no es lo único. También existe un alto costo económico para el país. Se invierte lo doble en el subsidio a la gasolina que en el programa Oportunidades o el Seguro Popular. También se invirtió cerca del 70% del presupuesto destinado a mejoras en el transporte en infraestructura para el automóvil. Sin embargo, solo el 30% de la población en México usa este medio de transporte. Algo no está funcionando. Cada vez vemos más puentes, túneles, pasos a desnivel y segundos pisos. Pero el tráfico sigue creciendo. Todo se lo debemos a la demanda inducida. Existen dos tipos de automovilistas, los cotidianos y los ocultos. Los primeros usan el coche para ir a cualquier lugar sin importar el precio. Los segundos usan el coche cuando resulta la forma de transporte más conveniente. El tráfico se comporta de la misma forma que los gases, se adapta al espacio que lo contiene. Por más que se amplíe su contenedor, las moléculas siempre ocuparán el espacio completo. Al ampliar la red de vialidades dentro de la ciudad, los automovilistas ocultos que en un principio evitaban usar un coche, comienzan a utilizarlo y las calles vuelven a saturarse, reduciendo de nuevo la velocidad de circulación. Cuando algo es tan fácil de usar y su costo es tan bajo, la demanda crece rápidamente, hasta que la demanda es demasiada y las cosas se complican. Si a esto le añadimos el bajo precio de la gasolina subsidiada y lugares de estacionamiento gratis en las calles, lo que obtenemos son más automovilistas ocultos que optan por el uso diario del coche. Estas supuestas soluciones solo complican las emisiones de CO2 y van acaparando el espacio público de las ciudades para darle paso al automóvil. Pongamos las cosas en la balanza. El 30% de la población usa el automóvil, el otro 70% otros medios de transporte. Pero el 100% de la población está pagando el subsidio al combustible que solo usa el 30%. Hay que cambiar las cosas de lugar. Pasar el subsidio del combustible a presupuestos para infraestructura de transporte público, ciclista y peatonal. Y ponerle un precio justo al uso de espacio público destinado al estacionamiento. Si se cobran los costos reales por el uso del coche, muchos automovilistas rápidamente guardarán el suyo y disminuirá el uso del auto dentro de las ciudades. Para que esto sea posible, se deben ampliar y construir redes de transporte público, peatonal y ciclista. Entre más real sea el costo del uso del auto, será menor su uso. Habrá menos contaminación, menos tráfico, menos accidentes, menos estrés, más felicidad y calidad de vida.
Okay, now we can please have a session of your questions, comments, ideas.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll start with questions from the students. Yeah, how about back over there?
So you talked a lot about this bus rapid transit, and I had never heard that phrase until today, so it's very interesting to me. Theoretically, do you guys have estimates on how those travel times compare to a traditional metro system?
Well, the metro, it also depends on the length of the trip, and also if you have to go down to the stations and the quality of the stations of the metro. But let's say that on average, these systems go around 20 to 25 kilometers per hour, and the metro goes around 40, 50. But of course, the metro it's more access time. What we have certainly done is studies on normal situation versus having a new system, and usually you cut travel times by half on surface. So where you have a lot of buses competing and not dedicated lanes, you cut like 50% travel times in some studies. And on our website, you can find out a lot about that if you want.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you moderate.
Yeah, could you speak a bit more about, in the video they talked about this concept of a shadow driver. Are those people who already own cars and normally choose not to, or do you induce people to actually buy a car and add it to the existing?
Yeah, usually induce people to buy a car, or I mean, the message is like you have this infrastructure, the way to get to the places is through a car. So usually it talks more about, how the message, the public policy, the impact of like building this infrastructure usually attracts more people to move by car, either by buying or by somehow using a car. Whereas if you invest on mass transit, you have the opposite, or you make it more expensive. People will think twice about using their car. Like in the parking meters for the Polanco study, we saw that a lot of people change the way how they arrive to the area, because you only can park for up to 6 hours, and so people either began doing some carpooling with other people, or arrive in mass transit or in taxi, or they change a lot the way they arrive. So, but there is a lot of studies needed to be done on that area too. It's a very growing important field to have more data.
Okay, because my follow-up was that are there cutoffs that you've seen in terms of like the ratio of the amount of time it would take you to go in a car versus on public transit, or the ratio of the cost that leads someone to decide whether to be a shadow driver or use public transit?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on of course, project per project, but yeah, there is a lot of, there is a point where people economically decide to make that choice, and that's really the challenge of how you set up the price and what are the options you give, no? But if you want, afterwards we can go more into it.
Okay, how about over here? Yeah.
On reducing the subsidy to gasoline, I know that Mexico is another thing, so is Venezuela, and usually it's very controversial for politicians to take that subsidy off, right? Do you have any studies or any case study actually on lifting those subsidies and the impact it has on people and the government?
Yeah, well, we certainly have the video show the amount and what that could be used, no, and then we should perhaps do more studies on what would you accomplish if you take off that subsidy. But as you say, yeah, the politicians, and we were talking about it, usually they think that it's not very popular, but if you do it more gradually and you also explain why you are doing it, because some of their arguments are not so good. Like, for example, car users are already the group that has the highest income in our cities in Latin America. So it's not really true that you are taking that away from the majority. You are really taking off the ones that have more resources. Some other studies are, I mean, the things they also said is that their worry is that there might be some inflation because the fuel subsidy, but that's not, I mean, from some economists we talk is really marginal, what you need to accomplish to have an equilibrium, and it doesn't have to be overnight. It can be like gradually, and of course you have to give good alternatives, and you have to link it to objectives and say, okay, we don't want to be so dependent on fuels. Let's begin to. This is why we're doing it, and this is why we're gonna begin to invest on. And I think that should be the argument. But yeah, you're right. It's a difficult, sensitive issue.
Okay, all right. Any more students? Yeah, okay, all right. We'll open it to you.
I would just like to give you my experience as a person who grew up in London in the 30s. Nobody used a car to go into the city, but we had surface electric trains that were grade separated, no danger, and we had a huge local bus system that took people from their homes to the railway station. You said nothing about that type of system, but I think it's the best.
Yeah, no, we really like all the surface. I mean, can be trolley buses, can be tram, can be, and the best cities I think have a combination of all of them. I mean, we're not biased against favor of one technology. The best cities like London, Paris, Berlin have a lot of all those different type of systems. So the best cities need to have a combination of all those. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's.
But I do think the way it worked was the planning ahead of time, so that they built the railroad tracks before the subdivision.
Yeah.
So that was the secret of success, is planning ahead.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the planning has to be a useful tool and not a reactive tool. It has to really, you have to plan and then follow up that. And our cities, unfortunately, they haven't really grown with a lot of planning.
And there is one final step, that they now have a tax on people who do drive cars into the city.
Yeah, congestion charge is great, and the center, and that has increased public transport a lot, and I really like that policy.
Okay, all right. How about we'll go over there to you, and then we'll come over here, and then back over to you. Yeah, okay, yeah. You with the white sweater, yeah.
You gonna talk at all about security issues, which is a big problem in most major Latin American countries? Have you found that sometimes people are reluctant to use public transportation because of issues of security? And how have you addressed that in those places?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, it's a very important issue. I think part of it is perception also, from people that don't use so much public transport, but part of it is real, especially outside the stations and certain things. So yeah, that's something we want to also address. We are more about really improving not just the trip once you are in the vehicle, but the whole experience from door to door. And from that we began to help also the government program about how to improve the intermodal stations. So they are like have a lot of more than police. I mean, it's a lot has to do with urban design. They have like good lighting, good areas where people, there's a lot of eyes on the street. That usually helps, but I mean, I don't think it's so much about in Latin America. That's my perception. Of course, that's part of why people don't use it, but it's more about the status of not wanting to go in the public transport. No, I mean, that's of course security, and for the already users, it's a big thing that needs to be addressed. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. It has to be like one of the most important factors of why people will use it or not.
Okay, all right, we had a question over here, yeah.
Yes, the local planners here on the peninsula have proposed a BRT system on El Camino Real. There's been very large political pushback. The first is it's a multi-city issue, and each city would have to award that, and also, of course, the automobile drivers see a loss of 3 lanes going to 2. And have you had experience, your firm had experience with a multi-city BRT programs and having to deal with the politics in each of those, and also the typical pushback you get from drivers who don't want the system changed?
Yeah, no, not so much on multi-cities, but certainly on the reduction of lanes. And we had some studies that really the speed, for example, didn't change so much. Really, but in the case of these cities, because also the traditional public transport system, you had a lot of buses trying to overtake each other, so they would also create congestion. But I guess at the end, it's, of course, you need to get that data, and it's important to get that technical data. But if you ask me, it's also a political decision whether you want to give a lane where you'll have more people moving. I mean, in a lane with a bus, you have over 3,000 people in 1 hour if it's 80% capacity, whereas a car lane, you won't have more than 600 people. So it's a little bit also about, and also on the emission sides, no, how much per passenger you contribute to the environment. So I think it's also about, look, you want to give space to move more people, or you want to have space to move cars, no? And I know the ridership in US cities is not as high as in Latin America, but I think it's also something for the future to say, okay, we want our community really to have a good public transport system. Well, of course, you need to get the data to say, okay, there is a space for everyone on the road. It's not only about one against each other. It has to be a balance, and really the most cities have, the good cities have good mass transit, and I don't see why you shouldn't have it here. No, I mean, that's my humble opinion. Yeah, no, of course, the coordination with other cities and see, I mean, yeah, that's huge. And we also have that, but usually, I mean, at the end, I mean, there's a public participation process, and at the end, someone has to take the decision, no? And
Okay, Herman, and then if we can make this one quick, because we've got to wrap up, but please, yeah.
Quick question. You mentioned this infrastructure project in Mexico City where they built this second story of this city highway, which is sort of like a second story of 280 from here to the airport now. Mm-hmm. Ridiculous, massive infrastructure project. Did you do any cost-benefit analysis of why did they build that instead of an electric train, an elevated train?
Yeah, no, I think it was, I mean, unfortunately, you know, there is also construction companies, also the car users are the segment of the population that has more influence, perhaps. So even if it's only 30%, they might be the ones that also have more influence. But yeah, we have put some numbers of what you could have done instead of that elevated highway, and at least you could have gotten the whole city with a good network of good transit. So it's a pity that they built that, and yeah, and it's already it's not even at the end you have to go down, and I mean I think it's some of the things we have to really challenge and give information about. Really, not a lot of people were against it when it was planned. So we need more people to say, even if they don't live around that area, to say, okay, this is not the way we want our city to really look in the future, no? So yeah, I agree. We need to get more of those comparisons.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you.